Okay, we want to welcome Cindy Burchett to episode 2 of Harlan Icon. So welcome, Cindy.
Thank you, Chad.
And just want to have you tell us about your life. And let's go ahead and start with your background, growing up, and where you were born, when you were born, and we'll go from there.
I have to admit that. I was born in Harlan in 1946, right after the war.
Okay.
My dad had been in the Navy, and they had lived in Coronado Island, but they came back to Harlan. I was born here. And then he used the GI Bill to get his mortuary science degree. His dad owned the funeral home here. And so we lived in Sunflower, Kansas for just about a year, but we drove back every weekend. He did the books for the furniture store and the funeral home. And so Harlan still was our home. We had an apartment here. And then I grew up here. My parents built a home on Baldwin Street in 1951. We moved there.
Where did you live on Baldwin Street?
1305. Chuck and Faye Smith lived there right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grew up there all my life. My parents lived there over 40 years.
Okay.
And so I attended Laurel School here.
And where was that located? I moved to Harlan in 1995, so I've heard of that, but I've never. It's before my time.
It's on kind of between 7th and 8th Streets there, down Laurel,
it's
and
where
there was a Catholic school, and there's now there's townhomes. Townhomes
there, right.
Right.
Okay, and what years would that have been, Laurel School, roughly?
Oh, that it was there?
No, that
I was there?
Right.
Oh, I was there from about, well, it would have been, I started school when I was 4 because my birthday was in October, so it would have been about 1950.
1950, and then that was an elementary school?
That was strictly an elementary school, and then we came to the old middle school. High school was all one, and that was 7th and 8th.
And that's where the Turkelson Center is now.
Correct.
Right. So let's get into, well, before high school, anything of significance, any stories about Harlan that you remember as growing up? I know you grew up in the funeral home business. Anything, and it doesn't have to be about that, but anything you'd like to share, stories from growing up as a child prior to high school that you recall?
Oh, I just think it was the easy way of life. We kind of walked everywhere. There was no fear. We weren't going to get abducted or no one. We just kind of walked everywhere. Sunday afternoons sometimes they had matinees at the theater. We'd go down there. There was a Maid-Rite restaurant there.
And where was that?
That was kind of where Molded Products is.
Okay.
Along there.
The official Maid-Rite restaurant?
Yes, it was
really?
The official Maid-Rite restaurant. The
red
red stools and the whole thing, and that was one of our favorite spots. And of course, Mickles. We lived at Mickles after ball games and that kind of thing as we got older, and would go there. And I don't know, it was just the easy way of life. You kind of knew everybody, and it was all the stores around the square were all owned by hometown individuals, and so it was very supportive place to grow up.
Yeah, sure.
And then I had my grandparents. My grandparents all lived here.
Okay.
So I grew up in aunts and uncles. I just grew up surrounded by family.
Sure. Well, that's nice. So let's get into high school then. What years are we looking at for high school for you?
Well, I graduated in 1964.
Okay. So and that was again at the old. Where it was middle school until the new middle school was built, so where the Thurkelson Center is now. Talk about your high school, your memories from high school, sports, activities that you're involved in.
We didn't have girls' sports until I was a junior in high school. They added golf, and actually the superintendent was our golf coach.
Okay.
The superintendent was housed there in the office where what then became the principal's office.
Right.
So it was Ray Forbes.
Ray Forbes.
Ray Forbes.
Okay. I've not heard that name.
No, and he was also our golf coach, but that was the only. Betty Brandstetter, who just was recently deceased and lived here for many years, she taught everything. She taught elementary PE and middle school, high school, and then she was also our cheerleading advisor. But she did it all, and she did what was a lot of intramurals and that kind of thing. So we played basketball and those kind of sports, but it was never competitive.
Right, and so golf was the first girls' sport in Harlan Community. And back then it was just Harlan High School.
Correct, Harlan High School.
And so, wow, I did not know that.
In about, well, when I was in 7th grade, so it would have been about 1958 maybe. They closed all the rural one-room schoolhouses, and those students all came into Harlan.
Okay.
Excuse me, which was a very big adjustment for everybody.
Right.
It really was. We had some rural students in our schools, but for those students, it was. We talked about that. We had a 50th class reunion last year.
Okay.
And talked about how traumatic that was. Everybody kind of looked like deer in the headlights, and it was
especially for those
that moved
now.
in.
So again, this is interesting to me. So we're not talking about the consolidation that happened in the early 70s.
No,
we're talking about
no.
the small one-room schoolhouses.
All the rural areas,
in the rural
all
areas.
around here. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Jacksonville and Corley and Monroe and they all.
And so that would have increased the size.
It did.
Decently.
We still only had about 108, 109 in our high school class.
Per class. Okay, that was a typical class size.
Typical class size, yeah.
Okay.
Around 100.
And so, golf, okay, so golf, and talk about a little bit, again, we know that Title IX is what really got women's sports in high school. What was it like for girls? How would you say it's different for girls back then in high school than it is might be today? I mean, were there, obviously there's less opportunities for girls.
Oh, much so.
For
I mean,
sports.
you were in band, you were a cheerleader, you were in speech.
Golf.
Speech and drama was big.
Okay.
Still, I mean.
So they had
those activities.
Just
and,
the sports.
Sure, and we had a pep club and
Sure.
you know, that kind of stuff.
Right,
That was
right.
kind of elementary
And
now.
so,
but also, I was going to say, when we graduated, even opportunities for women, they looked at a profession that they could still be at home with their children.
Right.
You were a nurse, you were a teacher, you were a secretary. There just wasn't the variety of opportunities.
Right.
We took science classes and that kind of thing, but we didn't go on, very few, just didn't go on to be engineers.
It wasn't pushed much.
No, it wasn't even pushed. Less than half of my high school class even went to college.
I was just going to ask you that.
No, it just wasn't.
You're talking
a thing.
girls that went to college.
Even
boys.
No,
Just wasn't really
it just
common.
wasn't. A lot of them farmed, stayed on the farm. Some went into nursing schools. Some, again, went to secretarial schools, or I had several friends who left after high school and worked for the FBI in Washington, D.C. or California, had a chance to, get to see another part of the country.
Right.
But a lot just went right to work out of high school.
And being a history teacher, I know Vietnam War is what really got people, because they wanted to avoid the draft, so they had to determine going to college. So that was more in the late 60s. Because you would have been out in you said 64. So I mean, Vietnam War, I mean, it started, but we were minorly involved.
By the time we were graduating from college, we had a full draft.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And so, So, were you in golf?
I was.
So,
you can't tell it the way I play now, but I was.
Okay, we won't go into your handicap.
No, we won't.
So, what was that like? I mean, being the first.
There were only about 8 or 10 of us, and yeah.
Good time.
Good time.
And the golf courses, the same. Were they both? I mean, we have the North Course.
We did not have the North Course. It was strictly the Harlan Golf and Country Club.
Okay.
We played there.
Okay. All right.
And we played Atlantic and Denison, Audubon.
How did we fare? Did we do well?
Yeah, we did.
Good.
We did pretty well.
Good. All right. What other activities were you in high school besides?
I was in band and vocal. I was a cheerleader. I don't know. I think at that time it wasn't a school activity. It was Rainbow. It was a Masonic organization, and I was active I went to the Methodist Church. I was very active in their youth group and choir and that kind of thing.
Right. Okay, and band, obviously band is very known for a lot of success. Was it successful back then as well?
Not as successful it is now, but
and who was the band instructor?
Mr. Donaldson.
Mr. Donaldson?
Donaldson.
Okay.
Donaldson.
Okay, again, name I don't remember.
No,
okay. All right, and this is homecoming week here at Harlan Community High School. Did you have those activities when you were in high school?
We
did. Dress-up days?
No.
No?
No.
And what about the homecoming
but we made
court?
floats.
Oh, you made floats? Okay.
With napkins and
all right.
that was a big week because you all went, you had a location where your class or organization was putting together a float, and it was the social activity for the week. Everybody showed up at that at night, and we worked until...
I know when I first started here in '95, probably for the first 5 years, we would have to come in at night and work with... Their floats were really, really big.
They were really big.
And I know they still make them, and I'm lucky enough to be a judge this year.
Great.
So tomorrow I look forward to that to see who the winner
That's
is.
hard to do.
But so yeah, floats was a really big thing, even when we first started here. What about homecoming court? Were you happen?
We did.
Did you happen to be on that?
I was an attendant, and Rick was king. My husband was king.
All right, very good. And speaking of Rick, did you meet him in high school?
I did.
I mean, small. You probably knew him, but were you going out with him in high school?
I was all through high school.
Okay, and did you have a feeling that he might be the
well,
guy?
Well, actually, he went to Iowa State after high school, and I went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and so we kind of thought we'd go our own ways for a while, but that didn't last.
And how did you meet then?
Just here.
Just being in
just
the
being
area.
Activities, actually working on a float.
Okay. Okay. Well, there you go. Maybe some of these kids will.
That was
meet
our
their
sophomore
future.
year, so that lasted a while.
All right,
he was a football player. Yeah.
Okay. So then college. You just said you went to the University of Nebraska. What took you there? What?
Well, for one thing, I wanted to major in elementary and special education. Special education was quite new, and they had a department. But mostly, I had family ties to Nebraska. My great-grandparents, my grandfather was, my grandmother's parents lived in Milford, Nebraska. He was a doctor there. And my granddad's family had been in the lumber business in several communities in Nebraska, and just had ties. We went to Lincoln a lot to see my family, and it just kind of felt like home. I don't know. Iowa State didn't have an elementary program. That's where Rick was going. And very honestly, I didn't give Iowa much of a chance, and I don't know why. I just didn't. Just didn't go there.
All right. And are you still a Nebraska fan today?
Well, I married Rick, who played football for Iowa State,
so
and they kind of indoctrinated me. I own
well,
Iowa State tickets. I don't get to go to Nebraska very often.
I applaud that. I applaud that decision. So
I still have to root for my Huskers, but I'm
sure.
afraid I'm also a dyed-in-the-wool Iowa Stater.
Okay. So the big question that everybody's dying to know: Iowa State plays Nebraska.
No, not anymore.
Well, when they did, and they might in the future. You're right, they used to every year, but now not so much. But who would you root for?
I had to root for Nebraska.
Okay, all right, the truth is out there now.
But I had a sweatshirt that had a red sweatshirt that had Iowa State in gold on this sleeve and Nebraska in white on this sleeve.
Okay.
We said it was a mixed marriage.
Okay, yeah. So, what was it you that pushed you? Were you motivated to go to college? Was your parents pushing you to go to college, or a combination? Because you said that only about 50% of the people at your high school went to college, even less than that. Women probably, girls probably even less. So was it more something that you knew you wanted to do, or parents kind of pushed you in that direction?
It was always instilled. My parents, because of the World War II, didn't get to go to college, and it was certainly instilled in me that I would have that opportunity. I was an only child. I didn't have siblings. I was kind of it. In their book, and so it was really instilled in me that had to be a goal. Also, I had a piano teacher, Ruth Potter, who was a really driving force in my life, very influential. I took piano for quite a few years, and she kind of played a role that women didn't always play there, and was, I don't know, knowledgeable about things like the stock market, and she'd buy gold, and I don't know how to describe her, but she was a graduate of the University of Iowa when very few women went to college. And she was a strong advocate for all people going to college, but especially women. And she really pushed that. She had magazines on her coffee table that you could read that would influence. She was a Gamma Phi. That happens to be the sorority that I joined at Lincoln. I heard about it for so many years. It just seemed to be a draw. But she was a big influence in my life, as was Mary Louise Peterson was actually my Sunday school teacher. And she also, I had all these Iowa grads in my life. It's a wonder I didn't go there. But she certainly was an influence and just encouraged women and young women at that age.
Good. Okay, so activities in college, what, anything, or just focused on studies for the most part?
No, I just seemed to not be able to say no, and I was in a lot of, worked with the foundation, I was with Red Cross, I did what they called the tassels. It was kind of the booster club for the gals. We had different sections, and then I was president of my sorority, Builders Club, I don't know, just a lot of of activities on
good,
campus. Yeah.
good. And you graduate college really in the midst of the Vietnam War.
I did.
And so, do you remember anything about the protests going on at that? Was there protests at Nebraska during that time that you recall?
There were some. It was just beginning. Certainly the music at that time reflected it,
Right.
We were pretty sheltered from that, and the whole drug scene at that point, it kind of exploded after that, and
Right.
the whole flower child thing was beginning.
Okay.
So I had some friends that kind of went that direction.
Mhm.
But I think was the protest, but it was also the negativity just about the war.
Right.
Interestingly enough, I have to just mention, I had Chuck Brandstetter was my social studies teacher in both 7th and 8th grade. And I remember him standing, we had a big globe, and he was spinning it. And this would have been, a number of years
Right.
before that.
Sure.
And he stopped it, and he pointed at Vietnam, and he said, "This country is going to change your life."
Really?
And we thought, oh, okay, all right, well,
Yeah, right.
move on to the next
Where's
thing.
Vietnam?
Yeah, where's
Where's
Vietnam? I don't know.
Yeah.
And it did. It
Yeah.
had a
And he
big
just said
impact in
that-
our life. And
Did he say that? Did he explain? You remember? Did he explain?
No,
why
I don't remember that he explained that. No.
Interesting.
But that's just, I just
just
could
remember
see him
that.
standing there spinning
Yeah.
that, and later that kind of came back to me.
That is interesting.
But it was the negativity of the public. World War II, people rallied behind the war.
Right.
And it was, people tried to escape the war. They faulted you for supporting the war. And I think I was probably more sensitive because Rick was going to be drafted, and
Right.
he still had 2 quarters left at Iowa State. So he chose to finish college and then enlisted into the officers training program.
Okay.
But it wasn't like people supported him. It was,
Sure.
well, for you, you got stuck, haha,
Yeah, right.
And I don't know why you're even taking part in this war.
Right.
And that was the attitude, I think, was the hardest part to live with.
Yeah.
I remember that more than I do the protests, but I certainly remember the killings at Kent.
Sure.
That stands out in my mind.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to post-college then. So you graduate college in 68?
68.
68. What's next for you?
Well, then I took a job in special education with the Des Moines Public Schools, and Rick, as I said, was still at Iowa State for 2 more quarters.
Okay. So just pause there for a second. Special education, relatively new program at that
Very
point in
new.
time? 'Cause it seems
They were just starting to educate children,
Right.
and again, only children that they felt could be educated in a classroom setting.
Right.
At that time, they didn't think that all children could be. Some children had to be in private schools, which is another, I did in Lawton, but in private schools, children that had really severe disabilities were not in the schools. They did not
Okay.
receive a public education.
And so what happened to those children?
They were in institutions or in private schools
Okay.
or schooled at home.
And then that started changing the 70s?
Yes.
And the
Yes,
80s?
early 70s.
Yeah, because, well, I just know that
Well,
that's...
actually, 1974, the law was passed.
Right, all of this started changing at that point in time, right?
But I taught
Okay.
students that were lower IQ.
Okay.
They were self-contained classroom. We were not allowed to go out on the playground when the other kids went out. We had our own playground time. We had our own PE time. We had our own lunch table.
And let's talk about that, because that to me seems crazy.
It does.
So
it does.
what, I mean, why? Why?
They
Just-
just thought they were so special and that they just needed to be. They didn't want them associating with the
Yeah.
other kids.
Right.
But fortunately, I was always a rebel a little bit, I guess, and I had a great principal, and I had some wonderful teachers that I taught with, and we began to slowly integrate them, let them go for some reading if they had those skills. We did some plays with some other classes, and slowly but surely,
Right.
we turned that around and began to integrate those children
was
within
that-
the school district.
Was that more just within our district, or was that, because I know
That was-
mainstreaming became a national push
Yes,
too.
but no, that was
much
just
later.
something that my principal and those 2 or 3 teachers would work with
Okay.
me on there
When
in
would-
that particular school. I was on the east side of Des Moines.
When would mainstreaming happen in special education? Do you know, right? Was that by the 80s? I don't know.
Well, I went back to teaching in 1987, and at that time we still had self-contained classrooms, although they would be go down to a home room, but I would say it was mid-80s.
Yeah, okay.
They
I
still
went-
really were not mainstream.
I went to high
truly
school in the
mainstream.
mid to late 80s. I'm just trying to remember, as a student, you just don't
Yeah.
think about it.
No.
Probably because they're separated. That's
Yeah,
probably why you don't
That's
think
why,
about it.
they
Yeah.
were.
And for the audience out there, self-contained, for education people, we understand, what's
Yeah.
self-contained versus mainstream?
They were in that classroom only.
Right.
They did not, they probably they got to be on the playground and that kind of thing.
Right.
But they were really an isolated population, which was so wrong, and
Yeah.
I think that's why I continue to be an advocate
Sure.
for children that had any kind of special needs.
Mhm.
I continued that throughout my
Right.
career.
And mainstreaming is just moving special ed students in with regular ed students.
Being part of the regular education classroom with specific help.
Okay. So how long are you at that district?
I was only there 2 years because then Rick was in OCS and was assigned in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I moved down there with him.
Okay. Now, were you married at that point in time?
We were. We had been married the summer right after I graduated.
Okay.
And we lived in Ames, and I
So the
moved to
summer
Des
of
Moines.
'68, you get married.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, and then you moved to
Then I
Des Moines.
actually we moved to Ames.
Ames. Okay.
And I drove back and forth.
Okay.
And then I moved to Des Moines while he was went into the military.
And what did you do during that time? When he was in the military, when you moved?
Well, I
Well,
was
you
still
continue
teaching.
you
I was
teaching,
still
you're
teaching in Des
still
Moines. And
teaching.
then I joined him and I taught in a school for children with cerebral palsy. It was
Okay.
a small private, it was kind of like Concerned was here when it first started. A very small school, and they kind of just again took children that didn't have another educational opportunity.
Right.
And so I taught there, and I also I substituted in the Lawton Public Schools before that, and I taught summer school.
Okay.
So,
All right.
you know, when you're in the Army and you're poor, you'll teach
You
anything.
do everything, yeah. So after that, what was next for you? It was
Well, then Rick was a gunnery instructor at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and he had orders for Vietnam and orders for Korea, but the colonel said, no, I need him as a gunnery instructor, and we remained there.
okay.
And our daughter, Sarah, was born there, and then that was when Vietnam, by 1970, began to de-escalate, and
Right.
they started sending people home.
Sure.
We had a 3-year commitment, but after 2.5 years, they told us we could have an early out.
Right.
So then we had to make a decision. He had some job offers in Des Moines. He had majored in industrial administration and business. But his family owned a construction company, road construction company here. His 2 brothers had just come back to help start that, or keep working on that. His dad had started it in 1953. But he felt his dad needed help. And so he decided that we should come back and he would go to work there.
Okay.
And so my parents lived here, his parents lived here, and so we moved back to Harlan. We
Reunite
knew it
with
was
your
a good
family.
place, a good place to
Sure.
raise a family.
Yeah. And that was what year that you moved back here?
1972.
1972.
Mhm.
Now going back to Vietnam very quickly, what did Rick feel about that? Was he very happy the fact you didn't have to go? I know some kind of felt guilty.
He did, and actually he would have been career military. I couldn't take all the moving.
Yeah.
I was a hometown girl. So our compromise was then, after we had moved back, he enlisted in the National Guard. And
Okay.
he retired, he spent 30 years in that and retired a brigadier general. So he gave another 30 years. He believed very strongly in the mission and in the strength of the military and his dedication to his country. It was just very strong.
Okay.
And so that's the way he chose to continue it.
Sure. Okay, so now you're back in Harlan, early 1970s. What do you do once you move back here?
I'm a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
And so then I start volunteering.
Yeah.
It just seems to be in my nature.
Sure. Oh, good.
And I really started out with the concern. It was not as we know it. It was in a little pink house by the swimming pool.
Right.
And again, they educated children that were not allowed in the public schools, but certainly needed to be with other children and to give the parents a respite. And so I volunteered there. Gosh, I can't even remember back in those days. There just seemed to always be something going on, whether it was a church or circle leader and that kind of thing. And eventually kind of got myself onto different boards.
Okay.
And then I was on the late 70s. I went on the library board.
Okay.
here. And that was when we were doing the fund drive and trying to get a new library built.
Okay, where was the library at that time?
The older library was right across from Jacob's Photography, there
Okay,
in the corner.
yeah.
It's a,
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah.
telemarketing or
Yeah,
something.
something there.
Something, yeah.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the building without the addition on
Okay.
it. That was done later.
And so then how do you get back into the Harlan Community School District?
Well, I also helped Nancy Ludwig, and she had the PEP program, and they were starting computers, and I had started doing payroll for Rick. We had IBM computers, and I used to take our payroll, I put it in the computer, and so I learned to use a PC.
Okay.
And then we would take it down to a huge mainframe and enter it down with George Applegate at
Right.
Farm Service Co-op to print our checks and
Right.
do our payroll.
Okay.
So I was kind of fooling around with computers when they were just starting. We had
Yeah.
pet computers, and I took a class and could do a little bit of beginning programming. I mean, very elementary.
Yeah.
But we wanted to do that with students, so I went up and volunteered and helped her there. Well, then an opening came. Leon Deskin was the only librarian in 3 schools, and they were closing Laurel, and they had the other 2, but they decided to hire a librarian, media specialist, they called it at that time,
Okay.
in both schools. And she was at Westridge, and so they needed someone at New Park.
Okay.
And I did not have the experience, but I understood computers. And Orville Frazier was the superintendent, and he had been my high school principal the last year.
Okay.
So I think I had an in, because
Sure.
I had no qualifications. But I got the job.
Yeah, sometimes not
And
the
I
right
went
person.
back, and Garrett, our youngest, we had 3 children by that time, and Garrett was in 1st grade, so it seemed like a good time to go
Yeah.
back. And Sarah was going into high school, and I knew we needed money for college. So I decided, I always said after the library uptown, that if I was going to go back, I would love to be a children's librarian. Well, it certainly took on a different dimension with going into technology.
Sure.
And I went back to school then at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and you couldn't do it online then, so I drove back and forth
Right.
every Wednesday night, and then I took 3 classes every summer. And for my endorsement, and I was about halfway through and thought I'd just as well get a master's, so then I finished my master's in administration.
Okay.
And I had the library at New Park for 5 years.
And what year would this have been?
I went back to teaching in 1987.
Okay.
And in 1992, we had kind of had a big turnover in principals, boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
And I had been active on a curriculum committee and worked with administration fairly closely on that. And I was just finishing my administration degree, and so I was approached by the administration and board whether I would be interested in being a principal.
Okay.
So then I jumped headlong into that, not knowing what I was getting into, and I did that for 15 years, 10 at Westridge and 5 at New Park.
Okay, and that would have, your first year there would have been?
1992.
1992.
And then they figured out that I had a special education degree, so then I took on special education and Title I,
Right.
along with the
Right.
principal.
Okay. And so, your principal, and what are some of the changes that you saw or helped bring about in our school? Well, especially at the elementary level while you were principal.
Well, I think one was we really delved into the reading curriculum, and we worked toward guided reading. We did, but we worked a lot with the language arts curriculum and integrating writing along with it. We, initially there was the swing away from direct phonics, but we began to incorporate a stronger phonics program. There was became a lot more teacher involvement,
Okay.
less administratively directed,
Right.
and more teacher input.
Okay.
Although I think sometimes they felt like their voice still was not heard enough. I
Yeah.
always said if we would just listen to the people in the trenches, we'd get
Sure.
farther.
Sure.
But I think certainly special education grew, but unfortunately it grew in some positive ways, again, in greater integration, but it also grew with paperwork,
Right.
a lot of paperwork, a lot of meetings that consumed a great deal of time. And it just seemed like everything then began to snowball. The paperwork for the state, we started Project Easier. I knew the minute I heard the name we were in trouble. And it was, again, putting in more and more data. Had to have data.
And it seems
And
like
we
that
had to,
continues
and the
to
testing
happen.
became increased, and so, you know, those kind of things. But computers came into being,
Right.
a great deal, a lot more use of computers.
Right.
I think Rand Peterson in his interview alluded to the fact that I had gone and pleaded help
Yes.
from he and
Yes.
Mary Louise when we
Yes.
needed money to have
Right.
a computer lab before we
Right.
had the funding.
He did.
And then eventually we had a fund drive, and the community in Harlan always did stand, whether that was money for the library, money for the new pool, money for the wellness center, money for our schools and our technology. Harlan always rallied and supported us and came through with the funding.
Good. And what would you say your philosophy was as a leader, a principal at the school? How did you, what was your goal to, as far as leading teachers?
I think maybe I didn't listen well enough, but I hope that they felt that I did at least listen to their views, because I did strongly believe that they were the people in there day to day, and that they were really the ones that we needed to listen to and let them help us make the decisions, because they knew those children the best. I also wanted it to be a family atmosphere. I wanted it to involve our parents, our students, that we were all one big family.
And I know one thing that helped that was chocolate chip cookies.
Chocolate chip cookies.
So
did help.
tell us the story. Where did that start?
I don't know.
You like baking, but I know my
I've
wife.
always
And
made
first of all,
chocolate chip cookies.
my wife. I want to thank you for hiring my wife.
I did hire
You hired my
you.
wife. At least
It was
part
a
of
good
the
hire.
process. And Molly Bruns is my wife. So where did that start? I know they appreciate.
Oh, I
They
think
missed that.
it kind of started from the beginning. I don't know. Every time we needed something, I just baked chocolate chip cookies. It was for my family. I used to make chocolate chip cookies and have them warm and hot when my kids came home from school, and it just seemed like something comfort food, I suppose.
Yeah.
And
Everyone loves chocolate chip cookies.
I just kind of started baking them, and pretty soon we couldn't start school unless we had chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
And I always wrote a note to every teacher and had it on their desk for the first day of school.
Cool.
I just thought that was important.
Yeah.
They're,
That's neat. And
yeah.
I know in today's Blue Zone school.
No, I don't
so
take. I continued to take cookies but Blue Zones. I don't take them anymore.
So what would you do? Carrots, celery?
I don't know.
Trays?
There's just nothing like a chocolate chip
I
cookie.
agree. I agree. It's so sad, but I know she enjoyed that. So.
And the funny part is, Jeff Moser called me the very first day of school of the year I retired and said, "Help! I brought Oreos and they're rebelling on me. Do you have cookies in the freezer?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm at Joslyn Art Museum in Omaha. I can't help you out."
Oreos are pretty good. They're my favorite store-made cookie, but yeah, they can't hold a candle to homemade chocolate chip cookies. And I've had yours too. They're excellent.
Thank you.
So, all right. So some of you might have seen, and for those that have stuck with us for over a half hour here, which we appreciate. You might have noticed the last little bit has been focused on that wall right there. Mysteriously, at the 32-minute mark of our video, the camera, and there's no camera person back there running it, it's just set up, mysteriously zoomed in. Being the Halloween season, I don't know if there's a ghost in the boardroom or not, but anyway, I apologize for that. And Cindy came back in another day to reshoot, and I appreciate that. And so we're just going to pick up with the last 10 minutes of our interview, and let's pick up with your retirement then. When did you retire, and what made you decide to retire? And also, we'll talk about what you've done since retirement.
Okay. Well, I retired in summer of 2007. I had submitted my resignation early, so they would have an opportunity to do hiring early.
Sure.
And part of what influenced me on that was my father was very ill. I had hoped maybe to take care of him, though he passed away in March. I also had a new grandchild who was living in Louisiana and grandchildren in Minneapolis, and I was wanting to see them, and I seemed to be working long days and weekends, and just decided it was time to let someone younger take the reins. We were also looking at building the new elementary school.
Right.
And I thought whoever was going to be in charge of that needed to be part of the design. So things just kind of fell into place, and it seemed like a good time to
Perfect
retire.
timing. Right. Okay, and I know that you've kept busy since your retirement. What are some of the things that you've done since?
Well, I continued on some boards and some committees here in Harlan. I also am currently chairman of the Iowa Public Television Foundation Board, and we usually meet in Des Moines, so I do that 4 to 5 times a year.
Okay.
And that's with people across the state, and of course it's something very important to me because I like access of educational programs, both for teachers and staff and also for every child and family. So it's quality programming, and so I'm enjoying doing that. I did work, taught just some adult education classes for Area 13 for I guess about 5 or 6 years.
How did that go? Did you enjoy that?
Well, that was good. I was teaching one of the evaluator approval classes for principals and superintendents. That was enlightening.
Yes.
And I also did a course where if people moved to Iowa, it was a requirement. It was human relations, but it was about diversity.
Okay.
And I never really met too many of the students, although I did a few. It was all online.
Okay.
But I met people from all over, and it was very, very interesting. I did enjoy it, and really developed some relationships with some people I have kept in touch with.
Oh, neat. Okay. All right. And so let's talk about Harlan. You lived in Harlan most of your life.
Yeah.
But what is it about Harlan that makes it a great community and a great place to raise a family?
For me, I guess it's the interaction of generations. When you go to any school event or community event, the homecoming parade, fair parade, anything like that, it's all the generations interacting with one another and supporting one another. It's fun to watch those generations grow. Some of them come back to Harlan.
Sure.
And then you start the next generation.
Right.
And I think it's all of those people working together for a common cause. It's also just the support. Anytime we needed any kind of financial help in the community, be that for the library, for the pool, for technology for the schools, for the wellness center, people always responded. They're very supportive, and I'm so pleased to see. For a while you kind of feel like, well, is this my generation? You know, I watched my father's generation and then my generation invest in the community, but now the next generation is stepping up, and it's just fun to watch.
Sure.
And I'm kind of stepping back and letting them do
Right.
it.
Oh, neat. Okay. And of course, being this is October 2015, and we know that you're going to be moving.
I am.
Here in another month or so.
I am.
And so, where are you going to be moving to, and why are you moving, and how tough a decision was that?
It was very difficult. I've lived in Harlan all my life, and I'm going to miss it greatly and miss the people that I do things with every day. But I have 5 grandchildren in Davenport. My 2 sons and their families live there. I'm still only 5 hours from my daughter, and her family, no matter where I live. And I was doing a lot of driving back and forth, and I just decided, my husband passed away last fall, and I decided that maybe I was better off there and to start a new life and to be part of my grandchildren's life day to day, and I just sort of took the plunge. Sometimes, you know, it's better not to think about it, you just kind of do it. So,
right.
yeah, looking forward to it.
And that's coming early November.
About the 10th of November I am moving. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, that is exciting. Change.
It is big change, and I certainly will be back for visits in Harlan, because this will always be a very important part of my life.
Sure. Sure. Well, you have added so much to Harlan. We appreciate all you've done. Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, I just have great memories of growing up here, and I think it's a great place to raise a family, and would encourage anyone who thought about moving to Harlan. I would totally tell them it's a great place to be.
Very good. I would as well.
Great schools.
It
Great
is.
schools.
It is. Yeah.
Best in the state.
And you've helped make that. So.
Wow, that's just a little piece of it. So,
all right. Well, thank you very much, Cindy.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right. Thank you.